I'm deeply concerned that this might get a little out of our control. And the real question is, who is really steering the ship of Canada?
Welcome back, everyone, to another electrifying episode of Tank Talks. I'm your host, Matt Cohen, and joining me as always is the one and only John Ruffalo. Get ready as we dive headfirst into the hottest news and most exciting headlines at the intersection of business, innovation, and politics. Welcome back to the Tank, John. Just picking up off a busy week here. How you doing?
Great, Matt. How are you?
Great. You're running around with your head cut off, I'm sure, with a lot of people reaching out to you. You know, one of the biggest conversations that kicked off from our initial conversation after Justin Trudeau's resignation was the piece that we talked about regarding the CRA. And funny enough, a day later, the CRA actually made an announcement saying that it is proceeding with the implementation of an increased capital gains inclusion rate.
Exactly what I said it was going to happen.
Exactly what we said, right?
Exactly.
And so now everyone's trying to figure out what's going to happen. So the federal budget, for people who may have forgot, has proposed legislation to increase the capital gains by about 16% for individuals exceeding the $250K gains rate. Now, there is obviously a parliamentary stalemate going on, and we all know what's going on with Justin Trudeau and the prorogation of government and parliament. But CRA's action, despite the lack of legislation, has stated that it is enforcing the higher inclusion rate based on the proposed inclusion.
Yeah.
So I guess, not giving any advice again, what I have heard, I'd love to hear your take on it, Johns, is it depends. If you have a $250K gain, file, pay, and claim it back. If you have a $10 million gain,
hold on.
I'm hearing people saying, hold off.
Correct.
Right.
Because so you're absolutely right. So this was the advice that I've actually been giving folks. And again, not giving formal advice.
Disclaimer.
Yeah, exactly. If I were you and you're over the 250,000 threshold and you're triggering the higher level, just don't file your taxes until, in end of April. Why is that? Is that the timing of what might happen, there might be a window of timing. So, some of the media reports got it wrong. The capital gains increase is not dead, but it's on life support. When they come back on March the 24th, there is a period of time between March 24th and April 1 at the maximum where there needs to be a bill to allow the government to spend money for the new fiscal period. So the real question in my mind here is, again, the Liberals have not said that they will call an election when they return with a new leader. So they're seemingly, I guess, because it wasn't stated, there needs to be a vote of non-confidence. The question is that when they come back, will the NDP support a vote of non-confidence on the next bill, which will be imminent in that week? If it is, then the legislation is dead. But if it's not, it could be passed, which would be utterly, stunning. But, the other thing is, remember we were having the deficit calculations?
Yeah.
It included the higher rates.
Right.
So congratulations, folks. We just are going to then have an adjustment on the deficit beyond the $62 billion. Because a number of that, and I don't know what the number is, included the impact of that higher rate. So we're just going to have to see. But at the end of the day, this is an utter shit show because you've taken away a basic principle of public policy. You need predictability and consistency. And by the way, I do not blame the CRA. They will have to, there is precedent to do what they've done. They've been put in a strange bind as well. So they're kind of, I'm sure they're not happy about it either.
The entanglement of what's happening here, the dominoes that are being impacted here, it's quite unprecedented, I think. I mean, I know there's press around this, but having all of this prorogation happening, having this deficit issue happening, waiting on a vote of non-confidence as well. There's just so many things that have to go on. It's crazy. And then you've got organizations like Canadian Taxpayer Federation and the Canadian Federation of Independent Businesses all voicing opposition, calling for the CRA to halt this enforcement until legislation is passed. It's quite crazy. But taking it up another notch, you've got obviously this individual, James Manson, a constitutional lawyer in Toronto, who is involved in this federal lawsuit challenging the legality of Prime Minister Justin Trudeau's decision to prorogue Parliament. I don't know if anyone out there has seen the post on X, but it is an incredibly thoughtful argument based on the precedent that we saw during the Brexit issue with Boris Johnson's prime ministership, and also how the courts pushed Parliament back into action and basically knocked it down from prorogation. So having this be now at the forefront of what happens next is also quite interesting, wouldn't you say, John?
No, absolutely. I mean, I'm not a constitutional lawyer. It was an interesting argument. Some of the lawyers I've spoken to saying that, they don't think that there is a legal basis for it. But, the whole point of all of this, though, is that there is multiple crises going on at the same time, and it's an own goal. It's been all manufactured by the Canadians, and, swooping over is the United States, causing its own grief to us. But, we're in this bizarre situation, and some of my, good colleagues in the United States who are very supportive of Canada, they have privately told me, is like, oh my God, you guys look like a bunch of clowns up there. Kind of get your act together. And, you've got so much internal stuff that's going on. It's kind of embarrassing. And God, I have to agree.
And one thing we talked about on the last episode, John, was how the premiers across individual provinces may have to step up to the plate here and start having their own outspoken conversations directly with the Trump presidency and how they want to handle things differently when there is no leader at the top. And we're seeing that happening in real time here, right? It's pretty amazing. We've got provincial leaders like obviously Ontario Premier Doug Ford, who's trying to come out on Fox News saying how we united front.
He did a great job.
He did a fantastic job pushing for better border security and the united message. There is a Canadian delegation heading to Washington on February 12th,
right?
Obviously hoping to sway some U.S. lawmakers. But then you've got Alberta Premier Danielle Smith also talking about boosting oil exports to the U.S. as part of a province-wide strategy. But then the craziest thing we saw from Ottawa's side was this sort of coming and picking off a bunch of U.S. targets like Florida orange juice, steel products, ceramics, glassware, and other goods where tariffs would cause pain for Americans. I think we're kind of reaching into whatever we think will strike a chord with Trump's group, but I don't think anything comes close to having a unified front. Would you say, John?
I think so. And, again, I think Trump is confusing his own folks as well. But at the end of the day, it really feels like that Trump wants somebody in Canada to pay, and he wants to smack and embarrass somebody. And right now, his two targets have been Justin Trudeau and Chrystia Freeland. But I'm deeply concerned that at least in the short term, this might get a little out of our control. And the real question is, during this interim leadership time, who is really steering the ship of Canada? And right now, it remains to be unclear to me.
It sure does. I want to switch gears here because I guess we're not just a political podcast here, but there is some exciting stuff happening in the tech world. Some people might not believe, but just today, RBC and Cohere announced an AI partnership where basically RBC is working with Cohere to build a bank-wide generative AI platform. The first time a Canadian bank is doing such a large-scale program like this with RBC being at the forefront. We all know that obviously TD is building a lot of their own internal large language models, given the acquisition a while ago from Layer 6 team. But there is this push within RBC to give generative AI support to RBC employees to quickly solve problems and give better, more personalized advice to clients, is what they're saying. And obviously, RBC being the biggest bank in Canada alongside TD is focusing heavily on security. That's why they want to do this within the own RBC's systems and data centers. And Cohere being, the large language model provider to help them answer and analyze large text and large data sets. This gives RBC Cohere a good footprint into the large enterprises, right? So we've heard that JP Morgan Chase is also starting to test their own versions of AI. What are your thoughts on this, John? And do you think, regulators will start to come in and worry about maybe privacy and things like that behind the AI?
I don't know where it was, but you and I had discussed where we thought the trend would be. I mean, many people have said this, but it's starting to shape up on here is, you have the public large language models and you have the private LLMs, particularly for the large organizations that have a massive trove of data, and they don't need more public data, at least to do a lot of the things that they want to do. And so this is an interesting validation that at least on this large organization in Canada has massive quantity of data. And, with Cohere's RAG technology, this might be the pathway, at least for the large enterprises. And, it is interesting, and they have the propensity to pay, and there might be a much stronger and quantifiable ROI for RBC. What to me will be curious, and Dave Mackay is very tech savvy. How will the other banks, other than TD, respond to this, and are they going to do similar efforts?
Right. Yeah, I think it's obviously something we're going to see a lot of more headlines in 2025. And because obviously there's a lot more development happening internally at some of these large organizations, they might be interested in some of these large language models. I thought they would go down the open source route, to be honest with you, and try to have something that they can buy and then manage internally. But it's interesting that Cohere hasn't been able to land such a strong partnership here, and we'll see what this does for the rest of them. We still see more headlines happening around AI. Anthropic's funding round is being rumored at the $60 billion valuation round, with the Wall Street Journal notifying that as well, which is quite remarkable. All 7 of its co-founders will become billionaires after this round is apparently done. So still red hot in the AI space. One last thing we didn't get a chance to talk on, John, in our emergency pod was the abrupt shutdown of Vancouver-based fintech company Bench Accounting.
Yes.
That was a big thing on December 27th for our listeners who weren't aware. Bench Accounting, which is a SMB accounting platform, works a lot with Shopify merchants, announced that it was shutting down abruptly, leaving a lot of customers, employees, and investors in lurk for just a few days before the end of the year. And the sudden closure caused a huge uproar online. A lot of people were kind of jump in trying to save it. But they ended up just a few days after shutting down on December 30th, receiving an acquisition offer from a company called Employer.com, which is a San Francisco-based HR tech company. Pretty amazing turn of events here. And now we see Employer.com going out and buying other recently shut down startups like Level. Companies that have raised over hundreds of millions now abruptly shutting down are getting picked off by people like Employer.com. The CEO is being quite vocal about what's happening behind the scenes as well. What are your thoughts on this, John? Are we going to see more of this in 2025 with a lot of these sort of walking zombie unicorns not able to find a home and then somebody swooping in after they've basically filed to shut down?
Well, what was different on the Bench one is how late this process occurred. I mean, you and I are aware of many zombies right now that are looking for a roll up or some other event to consolidate with someone else, and the investors are willing to exchange paper in one company for another one in a bigger enterprise. So I think that trend will continue. The funny thing on Bench though is, here's an organization that holds your data, and that the very year-end data is when the vast majority of people actually use the data. What I found that was very disappointing is, at least go through the year-end and protect the access to the data and leave enough dollars in there to say, look, you know what, we're running out of business here, but everyone who's been a loyal customer, here's your data for the year. You may have to transition that data, but many folks who had the data didn't have any further way to access that data and get it out of there, and paid in advance. And I just thought that was quite irresponsible. And, for a business that, for a while there, it looked like an interesting business, but, I think that was very mismanaged. And what we're going to see though is, on this acquisition on Employer.com, I guess they're trying to pick up a number of the employees or the contractors who are working at Bench. But I'd be curious to see ultimately how, have the the customer's been screwed? Are they going to have to pay to get access to their own data? I haven't heard anything in terms of what's going to happen to them. So I'd be very intent to listen on what happens in the next few months to all the customers.
Well, I think the other thing that maybe we don't know, because it was obviously at the very end of the year, is maybe, what we've heard is that the venture debt lenders called back the loan.
Yes.
And that was probably done many months ago in terms of a heads up on this. It wasn't maybe a last minute thing. Who knows? And they were trying to find a lifeline to extend the life of the business. The former CEO, Ian Crosby, came out, who was ousted in 2021, commenting on the situation finally after being quiet on it, but I guess he couldn't take enough of seeing what's happening to his baby. And so maybe there was just sort of this Hail Mary situation at the very end of the life of the business.
Yeah, we don't know.
That they had to just shut it down before the end of the year. But they probably knew a few months prior that the bank was calling back the loan. And that's where maybe they're playing a little chicken and egg here with, unfortunately, customers and their data and their companies.
Yeah. No, for sure.
All right, John, we'll touch base and see again what happens next week in the world of politics and tech. Thanks for joining us today.
All right, thanks, Matt.
Hey everyone, thanks for tuning in to another episode of Tank Talks. We hope you found today's conversation as insightful as we did. If you're enjoying the show, we've got 3 quick things to ask of you. First, hit that subscribe button on your favorite podcast platform so you never miss an episode, whether that's Apple Podcasts, Spotify, Google Podcasts, or YouTube. Next, follow us and stay up to date on upcoming episodes and behind-the-scenes content on social media with Twitter, LinkedIn, and Instagram. And lastly, share the love. If you found value in today's episode, share with a friend or colleague who'd benefit too. Your support helps us bring in more amazing guests and keeps the Tank Talks engine running. That's it for today. Until next time, keep disrupting and innovating.